So, of course, I'd like to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and we are discussing what's new in Onshape. And if you haven't attended one of these webinars in the past, once a month we do a webinar on the features that have been added in the previous month. And so we announce updates roughly every 3 weeks, if you're not familiar with our update process. And so it means that every month we have new things to discuss in terms of new features. Now, sometimes there are multiple updates, right? 2 updates. In this case, there's just one, so it's going to be a short webinar. But I encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. As I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask questions. There's a questions section in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question that you'd like, and I'll do my best to stop and answer the questions as we go through today's webinar. But again, it's going to be a short webinar. We only had one update in April, and that's what we're going to be discussing here today. So let's dig into it. So one thing that I want to mention for those that are relatively new to Onshape, they're not familiar with the update process. Onshape is updated roughly every 3 weeks. I say roughly, it depends on when the features are ready, but give or take a few days, it's generally 3-week process. The other thing to keep in mind is with our updates, you don't have to do anything. You sign in and new features are there. So there's no downloads, no installs, no updating process that you have to worry about. You simply sign in and things are there. It also means everyone using Onshape is always on the latest version. So in Onshape, there's not a concept of you're on this version of Onshape, but I'm on that version of Onshape. And it means that you'll never have any kind of version compatibility issues if you share your documents or if you're working with others, because everyone using Onshape is using the same version. And that's an important part of, kind of our design philosophy for Onshape. Now, of course, these updates that come out every 3 weeks include new functionality. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. Now, there's a lot of bug fixes and things like that go on in the background, but what we're going to focus on is the new features that are added. So let's dig into it. So today's agenda is pretty straightforward. There's one update in April, and we have another one coming hopefully very soon that you'll see. But that's what we're going to focus on. And important to stress, we had a big few months here, so I want to take a moment to look at some of those improvements here on this next slide as well. I'll pick a few of these improvements and just walk you through where you might use them, why they're valuable, and then of course I can answer any questions that you have as well. So that update that took place on April 13th. We're going to jump into the specifics of it. Before we do, I want to get into a few of the big improvements that we've done over the past 5 months. So if you haven't used Onshape in a while, if you haven't looked at the new features in a while, here are some of the big things that we've done in the last few months. And this is just a short list. Keep in mind that there's hundreds of new features that have been added this year so far, but this is just a few of my personal favorites. So, of course, release management, that was announced last month, about a month and a half now. And that's integrated directly into Onshape. It allows you to release your designs, have approvers, the whole workflow scenario. It's all built into Onshape. It's all integrated into Onshape. I definitely recommend, if you're interested, checking out the webinar we did specifically on release management, setting it up and using it and so on. Also, with that same update, we added simultaneous bill of materials. So this is near the end of March, and simultaneous bill of materials is a bill of materials that's automatically created at the assembly level. So you're going to see a new tab for BOM table at your assembly level. You click that, and your bill of materials will fly out. It's a really neat way to interact with your assemblies, edit metadata associated with parts or subassemblies in your assembly. It's a very neat layer to Onshape. The bill of materials in Onshape isn't just a table in your drawing, it's an object at the assembly level that you can interact with. So that was simultaneous bill of materials. Again, release management and simultaneous bill of materials both came at the same time, right, at roughly the end of March. Now, 2 other big updates that were also added at the same time, and that is configurations and standard content. That was added at the very beginning of the year. So early January, we added configurations and standard content. And again, we've done webinars on both of those topics. We even have training courses on configurations now. So there's lots of content out there if you're interested in learning those things. But if you're interested in building configurations or you need nuts, bolts, screws, and washers, standard content, definitely check those things out. Those are big features that were added so far this year. Some other things that we've done, not necessarily as big, but definitely important to a lot of users. Company-wide materials, the ability to import a material list and have that throughout your company. That was added this year. Rolled sheet metal parts was added this year. That was a highly requested one from sheet metal users. Create selection in the sketch, right? So now you can do like tangent selections and all those things at the sketch level. You can view imported 2D drawings natively inside of Onshape, right? Using the Arez Kudo viewer that's now integrated into Onshape. So really neat functionality. Now, one thing that I always stress with these what's new blog posts, webinars, things like that is there's a lot of drawing improvements with every update. But a lot of them are, little things. At the drawing level, there's thousands of details that have to be right, and so we're always adding little, details to drawing improvements. Way too many to list in a single slide or multiple slides, or it's just a lot. So those are some things to keep in mind from the past 5 months or so. Right. So far this year, those are some big improvements that I think are worth checking out if you haven't already. Now let's talk about April. And as I mentioned before, there was one update in April, which means we're due for an update here soon. And it happened on April 13th, 2018. And in my opinion, the biggest improvement in this update is the ability to edit linked documents in context. This adds a tremendous amount of capability to linked documents and in context. And it makes it a much more practical application for a lot of users in certain situations. So in the past, to clarify this, you were not able to insert a part, for instance, into a different document and then edit in context of that assembly that you inserted, right? That was a limitation in the past. And so it meant that if you wanted to design in context in that scenario, everything kind of had to be in the same document. And that was a tremendous limitation for those that are using linked documents and have, organizational techniques for storing their documents in separate places. You really couldn't edit in context with those linked documents. So that was, in my opinion, the biggest improvement. Ironically enough, it's just a right-click option, just like the regular edit in context, but now it works for linked documents. And I think that's the biggest thing to stress. Some other big improvements that were added. Configure sketch text was one that was highly requested. In the past, if you wanted to edit the sketch text, there's no way to configure what the text actually showed. Now you can. You can configure with a table. You can configure with a checkbox. It's up to you. But now you can configure sketch text. Next one, this is a small usability improvement, but big for those that are using the new simultaneous bill of materials, is now you can adjust the configuration name, quantity, item number. You can adjust the column width of those details of the configuration table. The last thing on my list, it's not one that I have to show, but it's just one that is important to, especially users out there that belong to multiple companies. Now you can use release management if you belong to multiple companies. So we know of a few users that were not able to use any of the release management tools that we recently announced because of this limitation. So I think I wanted to bring that up there. So without further ado, let's jump right into Onshape and start talking about these new improvements. Now, as I mentioned before, in my opinion, the biggest improvement is the ability to edit linked documents in context. Now, what do I mean by that? If you were to insert, let's say that I have this fixture plate that I've designed, and it's this generic fixture plate that I may use in other places, and I need to design or put a bolt pattern, let's say, that matches a certain part that I'm making, and I want it to bolt to this plate. But that part may exist in a separate document, right? So let's say that I want to attach this to the top of this and edit in context. How would I go about doing that? And so this is the real limitation in the past. If I created an assembly and I insert these things together, I couldn't edit one in the context of the other because they were linked, right? So how would you do this? The important first step, and this is not new, it's just something to kind of mention again if you're using a lot of linked documents, you have to create a version before you can insert as linked. I don't have any established versions, so I'm going to create one. We'll just call it V1. I'll click Create. So now we've created a version, and that's important because that's what you need to insert, of course, into your linked document. And what I'd like to do is in this document, a separate document, I want to assemble the fixture plate with my upper casting here. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to drop a mate connector on this to try and simplify mating that into place. And so now what I want to do is create an assembly, right? So I'm going to create an assembly, new blank assembly, and I want to start by inserting the linked fixture plate, right? So let's go into the fixture plate V1. We'll insert that part. Okay, right? So now I've inserted this fixture plate. Let's fix it just for good technique. And now what I want to do is insert my casting, right? This is my casting part that's going to be assembled with it. And so now I'll insert. To make this faster, let's turn on snap mode and use that mate connector. Insert, upper casting. Oh, one step that I forgot. Forgive me. Let's scale this because at first it is way too big. 2.375. And we'll use that. There we go. So it'll actually match the part we're attaching it to. So now what I want to do is insert into this, right? Now a tip is you saw I turned on snap mode. If you turn on snap mode, it will automatically look for any existing mate connectors in the part and start to attach them to the geometry. So in this case, I've inserted it and made it into place with that single click. You can see the fastened mate there. That's the benefit I get from adding that explicit mate connector. The Part Studio is I can insert it on the fly using snap mode. Kind of an aside there, but worth mentioning. Cool tip. All right, so I've inserted a linked part. Right, this is the linked fixture plate, and I may use this in other places, other documents even, and I have my upper casting here. And what I'd like to do is edit this plate to put the whole pattern of this casting into it, right? And this is really where the limitation existed in the past. You really couldn't edit things that were linked. And so now, again, it's not any different than it was in the past. It's just now when you right-click a linked document, you're going to see the Edit in Context option. Right? It's the same exact right-click option that we've always had. It's just now it's available in this certain scenario. And all it's going to do is take you back to that, Part Studio, but with the assembly context. So now we're creating a context between two different documents, right, with the assembly in this scenario, right? And you can see now I can create a context. So let's go ahead and start a sketch here and maybe convert a few edges, all right? Grab and convert a couple of edges here, and maybe just create some simple holes. Right, we'll go through all, okay. And so now we have a bolt pattern that matches this part, and this part came from a separate document, right? Now, I think this is most applicable in those kinds of scenarios where you have these separate projects, but you need one to be worked around another in a separate document. That's really where this is most applicable. Other than that, it's really just like designing in context like we've always done, right? In terms of how you interact with it, it's really not any different. You get the same symbols indicating that you have a reference in context, right? You get the same arrow indicating that. So it really shouldn't feel any different, because, of course, it's linked documents. It's just going to behave the same way. There is one difference to point out, and that is the dialog at the top is going to say something slightly different. That's because we're working with linked documents here. And if we tend to update where this came from with these new holes, because it's linked documents, of course, we need to create a version and then go to the assembly. And that is different than if everything's in the same document. right? So important to point out that is a small difference. Now, keep in mind there's also this option for just go to assembly. This is a great if maybe the context is wrong, the position's wrong, or you just don't want to create the version at that moment in time and go back to the assembly. You just want to go. That's up to you. Keep in mind, create version and go to assembly is necessary if you want to update where it came from, because again, we're using linked documents and that version is necessary to get the update. But that's really all you have to do. You click create version and an update. It will take a moment to go through and update everything, but that's really all it takes. You get that option at the very top there, and that's really all you have to do to work with linked documents in context. Again, it's the same exact menu option. You just right click on it and choose edit in context, but it takes you to a different document. That's the key thing. And then you have the option to create a version. That's going to create a snapshot in that document and then go back and update in the assembly. So that is edit linked documents in context. The next one on my list is configure sketch text. This is another highly requested one from a lot of users out there that work a lot with sketch text and configurations. In the past, you couldn't do this at all, meaning if you changed configurations, you had to manually go in and edit the text for each configuration. Certainly not the answer that a lot of users wanted if you had that situation. So that's the next big one on my list. It's fairly simple to show, so let's jump into an example that I have here. And so what I have is just a simple, text, sketch text that I've inserted. And at first, it's just a normal sketch text, right? If I go edit sketch text, let's go into edit sketch and edit text. You can see it's just a normal string of text. And in the past, if you wanted to configure this, you really couldn't. There were no ways to say, for this configuration, I want to show this. And for that configuration, I want to show that. There was no way to do that. You had to manually edit that text every time. So now we have a solution to this in configuration inputs. And you can choose either a list or a checkbox. I'm going to choose a list. And what I want to do is list out the potential options that I want to specify here. So let's go into the sketch, right? And I can right click on the sketch text and choose configure sketch text. So that's the new option. When you if you have a list or a checkbox input, when you right click sketch text, you're going to see an option to configure that sketch text, and it will allow you, as the name implies, to configure it. You're going to see your text added here, and I could go in and add new names, edit values, whatever it is that I wanted to do. So again, the ability to configure that sketch text and alter it on the fly, that's really what's powerful here. I can go in and let's say SAE port 1 and 116, right? -12, let's say. And I can say for this, it should be 1 and 116-12. And what will happen if we switch to is you'll see now that text has been configured, right? So now I'm controlling the text via this input, right? This table input. So that's really it. If we switch back, you'll see it update here. Again, we're just controlling the text input based on these configuration inputs. So that's the key thing to stress. That was not possible in the past. In the past, you had to edit the sketch every time you changed the configuration. If this is something that you did often, this is really specific, of course, to those that do configurations and those that need configuration values linked or in some way driven by configurations. Questions. Are there many requests for users to delete old, outdated versions to clean up documents? Not that I've heard, but I would say use the feedback tool and let us know if that's a big issue for you. I haven't heard a ton of that, but keep that in mind. It may be something that's submitted to support often. I'm just not personally hearing it. Is it possible to use equations to dimension things? If I change a dimension, linked dimensions change sizes. Yes, you can use. What I would recommend is checking out variables. We've done webinars and things like that on variables that discuss how to drive and link dimensions to one another, and the whole workflow for that. Yep. I've read a lot of limitations on CAD systems to use genetic algorithms for design. Does Onshape have something on this matter? No. I'm not familiar with any genetic algorithms in CAD tools, in mechanical CAD tools, I should say. I sent an email about updating the section soon. I'm sorry. I didn't see that email. Forgive me. I can answer you that in at another time. I can respond to the email directly. Okay, so what I'd like to do is go over the final thing that I wanted to mention. And that is, and it's a small one, but for users that use a lot of bill of materials, it's a big one, and that is the ability to resize the columns. I know that sounds kind of trivial, but it's one of the most commonly requested things that we got as soon as we launched simultaneous bill of materials. So that's really the last thing that I wanted to mention here, and that is just adjusting the configuration name column width. Again, sounds silly, but things like item number, quantity, you couldn't resize that, and if you wanted to add a lot of things to your bill of materials, it quickly got very, very big. It took up a lot of screen space. So just a simple thing, but it is something that a lot of users requested, so we wanted to add it quickly. Question, where can I check past webinars? You can go to Onshape Video Library. If you do it on Google search for Onshape webinars, you'll find them. Those are the simplest ways. Onshape Video Library has all of them. YouTube has a lot too, so we try to keep them in sync, but lots of places, just simple searches, you can find them. If you're interested in the variables webinar, I would just do a search for Onshape webinar variables or something to that effect. I'm sure you'll be able to bring it up. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this is a small usability improvement, but I know there are a lot of users out there using simultaneous bill of materials where this was frustrating. So I do want to mention it's something that is very simple, of course, but it is now possible, and it wasn't in the past. So if I click on the BOM table icon, if you're not familiar with the simultaneous bill of materials, this is how you access it, via the BOM table icon. Now, the most important thing is you can grab and drag and resize these. Okay. Again, I know, kind of trivial, simple, but for a lot of users out there, that was important because as you added more and more columns, this takes up more and more of your screen. Right. So that's a small one. We're working on ways to make this even better. So you're going to see improvements to the BOM table, throughout, the next, years, as always, as with everything Onshape. But it's an important one to keep in mind because, again, this is something we just announced a few weeks ago, about a month ago now, and we're already making improvements to it. So we're going to continue to just keep that in mind. But this is one that I saw a number of users requested, both in the forums and through support. Is it possible to add additional info to the BOM? Example, consumables? No, not today. I will say that's probably one of the most requested things for bill of materials, so it wouldn't surprise me to see that soon. But as of today, no. Any major update that you can talk about that is coming later this year? Most requested user feature update that is coming later? No. Unfortunately, we don't talk about specifics of updates or any major pieces of functionality before they come out. So in general, that's just a practice. I will say, sometimes we give general, this is areas that we're working on, but at best that would be high level, things, not specific features. Can you change the standard column names in the BOM table? Example, change quantity to QTY. No, but stay tuned. That was another one that was highly requested, and hopefully will get done very soon. But the good feedback. Thank you, everyone. The resizing columns was feedback that we wanted to act very quickly on, and I know that a number of users have asked for the ability to change the column names as well, so it wouldn't surprise me to see that soon. All right, so that is the improvements mentioned here. As I mentioned before, we really only had one update in April, which is somewhat rare for us. Normally, it's at least two. Well, it's two, just depending on the update and where they fall. In this case, it was only just the one. So we're going to wrap things up here, but I do want to mention this last one just briefly. And this is really specific to those trying to do release management and belong to multiple companies. So if you fall into that category, it didn't work for you in the past, and now does. And so just keep in mind, if you tried release management up front, it didn't work because you happen to belong to multiple companies, that's your scenario, try it now. You should be able to get that running up and working. So that is the April 13th update. One last thing that I want to mention, if you're interested in learning more, if you're new to Onshape and you're interested in learning the basics all the way up to in context design and some of the more complicated things that we do in Onshape, definitely check out the Onshape Learning Center. There's a huge amount of resources in the Onshape Learning Center. There's self-paced training, there's instructor-led training, there's technical briefings. All of it can be found at learn.onshape.com. So again, a valuable resource if you're looking for training and getting up to speed in Onshape quickly. Even if you're interested in learning a certain topic, maybe you've used Onshape for a year, but you've never used in context. Well, I would definitely recommend checking out the Learning Center. There's a lot of good topics, lots of great content to go through. So that's my last comment here. I am going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. So please ask any questions, stick around, and feel free to type in any questions that you like. I'm going to make sure to answer all of them. But that's it, everyone. Thank you, and have a good day.